at Bio20s. I'm back again for another lesson. Today we're going to talk about the second half of photosynthesis, the light-independent reaction, also known as the dark reaction. Now just because it's called the dark reaction doesn't mean we have to learn in the dark, so I'll just flick the lights on real quick. And then we can get going. So a little recap from our last discussion on photosynthesis. We learned that in the light-dependent reaction, we take light, water, NADP+, ADP and phosphate, along with some hydrogen and electrons, and we create oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. So those three are the products of the light-dependent reaction. We are going to use two of those products because once again, oxygen is just given off as a byproduct. We're going to use the ATP and the NADPH along with the CO2 to create glucose. So the main goal here is we are going to create one molecule of glucose. Now, as the name suggests, light is not required. But oftentimes people make the mistake of, oh, so this happens at night and the other part happens during the day. That's actually not true. Both of these processes happen during the day because while this light-dependent reaction is going on, the Calvin cycle, the light-independent reaction is also going on at the very same time in the stroma. So they're both going on at the exact same time. So what we're going to do is we are going to take energy from those high-energy ATP molecules. We're going to take electrons from those NADPHs, those electron carriers that we created in the first step, and we are going to use the CO2 to create two molecules of G3P, which is essentially like half the glucose. When you take two G3Ps and you stick them together, you get one molecule of C6H12O6 or glucose. Now the hydrogen, if you look at the actual, I'll even draw this for you here. So glucose, C6H12O6. What does that mean? It means one molecule of glucose has 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. The hydrogen is supplied directly by the NADPH. It gives off the H to create the glucose. It'll also give off some electrons needed to make that reaction. The C, the carbon, and the O, the oxygen, come from CO2, carbon dioxide. You're going to get 6 carbons and 6 oxygens. And all of this, once again, takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast. When this cycle is done, and I do want to stress here that the cycle itself is quite complicated. For Bio20, you don't need to know the actual steps involved in the Calvin cycle, but it is fairly complicated with a bunch of intermediate products happening along the way. What you do need to know is what is going in and what is going out. So what is going into the Calvin cycle? Well, that's going to be our 6 molecule of CO2, right? It's going to be our NADPH, and it's going to be our ATP. Those 3 things are going into the Calvin cycle. One round of Calvin cycle, and what it really is it's a series of reactions. At the very end here, we make a molecule of G3P. We make 2 molecules of G3P, stick them together, we get glucose. And from there, the plant can leave it as glucose, use that glucose as energy for cell respiration. It could store it as starch, store it as sucrose, store it as cellulose. There's a whole lot of things the plants can do with that glucose. So the products would ultimately be glucose. We also get some NADP+ because it's donated its hydrogen and electrons, so it's back to NADP+, and we get some ADP and phosphate, which will then go back into the light-dependent reaction and fuel that. So really we're just switching between ATP and ADP. Those two are just switching back and forth. And then ADP, and then NADP+ and NADPH. Those two are just switching back and forth. Now, I kind of like to think of making glucose as like a recipe. You know, if you've made a recipe, you've baked cookies or something like that, they say how many eggs, how much flour, how much milk, etc. So to make one molecule of glucose, if you want to make one of these, here's your recipe for glucose. You need 18 molecules of ATP. So you need to produce 18 ATP and those molecules are all needed to run the Calvin cycle. You need exactly 18 molecules of ATP. You will need electrons and hydrogen from 12 NADPHs because there are 12 hydrogens in a glucose molecule. You will need 6 water molecules. Those are obviously used in the earlier stage, but if you look at the balanced equation of photosynthesis, 6 water molecules, that's where your NADPH and your electrons are coming from, essentially hydrogen for the NADPH. And then finally, 6 CO2, ideally readily available in the stroma. So at the end of the day, as long as the plant has access to sunlight, water, and CO2, it'll be able to go through photosynthesis. Now I'm going to pull this diagram up again just to show you the entire process all put together. So once again, we are going to start this process with the light-dependent reaction, but also the independent reactions are happening at the exact same time. So water is going to split into oxygen, hydrogen, and an electron. The electron is going to be charged up in photosystem 2. It's going to be excited. It's going to move down the electron transport chain, also known as the ETC. When it gets to the end of the ETC, it will arrive in photosystem 1, where it will recharge, join forces with another electron, a hydrogen, and a molecule of ADP or NADP plus to make NADPH. And ultimately, we are going to need 12 molecules of NADPH to make 1 molecule of glucose. Now, while those electrons are going down the transport chain, they are attracting hydrogen ions, which are then being pumped into the thylakoid membrane. Remember, this is an entire thylakoid disc. So now the thylakoid is filling up with hydrogen, positive ions. And the only way that they can get out, because eventually there's going to be too many of them in there, the gradient will be high to low, so they want to leave. The only way they can leave is through these special protein molecules called ATP synthase complexes. Now, every time a hydrogen leaves, it'll turn a little molecular motor and then slap a phosphate onto a ADP to make ATP. And ultimately, we're going to need 18 molecules of ATP. And then finally, we're going to take our 18 ATP, we're going to take our 12 NADPH, and we're going to bring in 6 molecules of CO2, which is readily available in the stroma. They will undergo a series of reactions within the Calvin cycle to then produce 1 molecule of glucose. And there you have it. That's how glucose is created. That's how glucose is made within a plant. And then that plant can go ahead and use that glucose for its everyday life processes. It can store it for later. It can do all sorts of things with that glucose. So next lesson, we're going to talk about cellular respiration, often considered the opposite of photosynthesis, but I like to think of it as a process working with photosynthesis. We're going to talk about how cell respiration works and the different steps and processes involved in that. So thanks again for watching, and we'll chat soon.